Thanks so much for tuning in, especially during such a difficult time. I have to say this isn't exactly how I pictured my reading with Peter Gizzi. Peter, whose smile I just came across in this book by Atel Adnan. So this reading will be my attempt to send a smile his way. And in fact, in honor of this reading, I'm facing my computer westward toward Amherst, toward Peter, toward Patrick Bridget, one of the organizers of this event, who's a dear friend of mine, and also with thanks to Ed Foster and all of the other organizers of this reading. As someone who organizes readings myself, I know how much care and attention goes into making these seemingly seamless happenings happen. So thank you. The poems I'm going to read are all about nearing and neighboring, and strangers and strangeness, friendship and other formations and relations that aren't usually accorded the usual rights of recognition by our society. They're all taken, for the most part, from a book I've been working on called Neighborn, and that's neighbor with an N. And it has an epigraph by Charles Olson, and it goes, "So born, B-O-R-N-E, as in born away." Neighborn. And forgive me, this is a kind of a challenging poem to read, and I am sitting on my floor in my apartment, which is almost the only place I can get good reception and light, so not exactly the best place to try to read a manifesto about nearness, but so it goes. Neighborn. I did not let, gradually, myself be privatized. I didn't come to live in someone else's idea, or let man plant the attribute of badness inside my mind, or rain shame on the same places as my pleasure. I came and could not conserve myself, crawled and was stood among introductions, fell and raised myself up again, for such as I was eligible. I did not come in the posture of apology. I am the body here for the ones buried. Out of the womb I came, out of the womb you came, out of the wombs we came, dragging this cord. This animal I am being human in, this nakedness from which we are not dismissed, this part of us that is fear of us, it occupies me, this errand out of narrowness, this skull healed too soon into descriptions of a ceiling. I do not think our minds should be so many descriptions of a ceiling. I did not let the names fall asleep on the named. I do not speak the sentences that sell things. On earth, where the cost of anything is, the amount of existence spent on it, where the summons of the other meets the anguish of retention. I came and testified with my body. You came and testified with your body, bearers of the question, bearers of the question, bearers of the question of how to be free and also found. The stranger I know to be you, the stranger you know me to be. So we continue the contrary journey. Well, that went okay. I messed up in a few places, but I think you'll forgive me. And now for something unforgivable. Donald Trump. This next poem is dedicated to the children of Dhaka, the dreamers, and to all those families who've been so senselessly and cruelly separated at the U.S. border. The poem adapts some lines by Lauren Berlant and Jared Stanley, and I wanted to thank them for those lines. While writing this, I was really thinking about a beautiful passage by Stanley Cavell, which goes, "For a child to grow requires the familiar. For an adult to," I'm touching my face, sorry, for an adult to demand strangeness. I'll repeat that again, sorry. For a child to grow requires the familiar. For an adult to demands strangeness. Amendment. The love of each of us for some of us, of some of us for all of us, equally valued being in this world, most evident in its failure. And what would come if it were welcome? If learning were to prepare a self with which to welcome the unfamiliar bias, where a child can safely be a child, is justice. This next poem is very short, and it's dedicated to my friend and neighbor, Fanny Howe, who has, of course, dedicated her life to the welfare of others, especially to children. And by dedicating this to her, I can also steal her title, Night Philosophy. My neighbor says she's left all philosophies behind. They are so far apart now, the mouth and the word, and replaced them with a single question. Where does it hurt? This next poem is called Megaphone, and it has a line by Tongo Eisen Martin. This is, of course, for the protesters. Megaphone. So that the body isn't tried in secret, or stood against walls, or made to gain from pain to pain the credential, and so that the lamb, and so that the lamb, and so that the lamb bleating in the sharpening barn is magnified into the pasture, the future. I thought maybe I'd read this older poem of mine that's not so intense. It's called The Long Now, and the title is taken from a project by Peter Gabriel. I'd been writing this poem about an early love of mine in a cloister in England, and this magnificent tree that rises up through the cloister. And at the same time, I came upon a description of this environmental nonprofit by Peter Gabriel called The Long Now, which is actually based on that same tree and cloister in England, and about the kind of temporal humility of the people that built the cloister. They planted trees beside the cloister, I believe, in order to rebuild the cloister in the centuries ahead. So they had this foresight of their place in time. The Long Now. Above us starlight pierced through the wormholes, and in the center of the courtyard a tree, its branches like men in darkness reaching at walls. Under it we spread ourselves, and for a moment were in the continuous touch of the crawl we came from. The third wall was forged, time within us, without us. There is a saying that towards a forest came an axeman, and one tree said to the others, "Fear not, for the handle is one of us. Love the destroyer, love the preserver. Wherever you are now is one of us." Sorry, I got a little choked up reading that. For some reason, those last lines remind me of the recent reassurances of John Lewis. Such a magnificent man. And his urging of us toward good trouble, and his finale of fearlessness. John Cage, who's quoted in the next poem, suggested that one way to improve society is to spend more time with people you haven't met. So this is called To a Passerby. I cross the street to greet you, whoever you are. If we never speak, I'll only hear everything else. Anything to which harm might happen is alive and testifies. Dying, my father said. We were at opposite ends of the hall and had just left our separate rooms and were in the hall itself. So think of that the next time you don't go introduce yourself to someone. It's all risk. So necessary. The next poem is dedicated to the boundary crossing legacy of C.D. Wright, and takes the title from one of her remarkable books. I'll probably change the title, but it was a title that allowed me to write the poem, so I wanted to keep it in. It's called Shall Cross. A law very different than one I have to think about is going on in my neighbor. I have sent so many words over that wall, which everything is because it is holding a little of itself back. How is it I will never make it over the wall of my mother, my father, my brother? I cannot be from a house forever. Am I to be from a house forever? It is my desire to drop blossoms and fruit over that wall. It's so strange when you read poems. That's just like not the rhythm I had written it in, but I'm just going to roll with it here. Oh gosh, I should say that last line was by Sherwood Anderson from his American Spring song. It is my desire to drop blossoms and fruit over that wall. I had originally intended for the entire book to place lines by distinct writers next to each other and sort of catalyze that nearness and neighboring. But that idea survived for about one poem, and I thought I'd read that poem. This poem brings together lines by Amiri Baraka and George Oppen, and it's called Found Poem. And it starts with their two lines next to each other. Among things with souls, find me. I am good or I am bad. Find me. I am so apart a person these days. Strange that you won't have found me while I was having my existence. I who was while you. I slightly messed up that last section. Maybe I'll read it again. I hope that's okay. There's just a key word that I left out. Found poem. Among things with souls, find me. I am good or I am bad. Find me. I am so apart a person these days. Strange that you won't have found me when I was having my existence, I who was while you. The no or nay in the title Nayborn, sonically there, not spelled there, but also extends, for better or worse, to my own poems, which I keep self-silencing, and almost stopped this reading because I have such a critical mind about my own work. I keep self-silencing my poems in the belief that they haven't reached a condition I aspire to and that I associate with poetry and the great privilege of pursuing this art form, which I consider, other than love, one of the highest privileges. I've tried to write work that is wide, magnanimous, searingly impersonal, free of self and selfishness. I have tried to reach a kind of all thought, and I failed, obviously. But I hope that in reading today, you'll understand that I am actually trying to push past that obstacle in myself that is really self-induced, and so in being invited to give this reading, I am beginning to move past that self-silencing. On that note, this poem is called Not Book, and that's actually a title by, I believe, a friend of Peter Gizzy's, Robert Seidel. Not Book, and it has an epigraph by a woman who was imprisoned for too long. She writes, "The fear of succumbing to self-censorship, as well as to the states, is a real fear. Though we could hear speech reaching, there was one question that kept never coming because of the guards. What guards?" we asked. That is the question. This next poem is called Epigraph/Epitaph and begins with an answer to a question. Nakedness, nakedness, nakedness. As the poet replied to the question, "What are you trying to prove?" Life is stingy. It's the death in us that's generous, that gives us nude and wants to the very world. I should say nude and once is a line by Robin Blazer, a poet I deeply admire. I actually recorded the first part of that a couple months ago, and I decided, what with everything that's happened between August and October, that I just cut the reading really short and end with a few poems. They're saying that so much has happened that future doctoral candidates are going to say something like, "I specialize in October 1st to October 2nd, 2020. I specialize in October 2nd to October 3rd. Anyway, I don't need to tell you any of that, but I probably don't need to remind you that the Trump years have foregrounded and exacerbated the dichotomy between fake news and the truth. But to a certain extent, the media has left out the third that walks beside these, which is, of course, unknowing, and or rather the fact that truth at times includes the unknowing within it. I think sometimes, and you might experience this too, when I'm writing a poem, I kind of get to a point where I want to close it down because it's the unknowing is too much with me. It's too many, and then of course what I look for in others. I'm thinking in particular of my remarkable co-readers today in this festival. Is their capacity to inhabit and persist in that very unknowing, in that liminal space. So I decided to write this little reflection and dedicate it to them, especially the last line. It will probably never be published, but for now I'm calling it No Last Dark Wood. I write the poem to put an end to the poem. How many it is. What is a world doing in such a place? If by world is meant the largest thing we can still be a part of, there is no book of only understanding. And now I'm going to end on these last two poems. This next one is dedicated to my fellow protesters this past spring and summer. And I guess it's also my wish as somebody who is white to remind myself that we've been given this chance to learn, to change, to align at long last with our declared values. It's called American Spring, and it's based on a poem by Sherwood Anderson by that same title. And the epigraph, which I think I might have mentioned earlier in my reading, is by the great scholar Vincent Brown, who defines freedom as, quote, America's everlasting not yet. So this is called American Spring Song. To live, to head toward the entanglements, the meaning of the seed, tremor of metamorphosis like a train that is coming. Or did you think you were safe from further births? It is morning, and you go to the mirror in which you have practiced appearing. You were born. Why are you not born? And that last question is largely Sherwood Anderson's, but I guess it's my question to America itself. We were born for these very declared values. Why have we not yet been born into the fullest fruition of those ideals? And I think I'll just end on a poem called An Ethic. I wanted to dedicate it to all of you and to thank you so much for taking the time right now, especially in the midst of so much, to even listen to this. So thank you. An Ethic. There is no this or that world. One is not more or less admitted. Into the entirety one is invited, and to the entirety one comes. There is no this or that world. Only the long illusion we are landlord, the never-ending study of anotherness, the arc of ilks and kinds. It is a later wilderness in which we find ourselves. It is an our thought if we but find ourselves. We will find that we dwell on the one earth. I hope we are found to have lived on no this or that earth. Thank you so much. Take good care, everyone.